The secret life of your brain. We take the brain for granted except when we get a headache. But think about it. The brain is the only organ in our body that's encased in a cranium, a skull of hardened bone. There's a reason for it. For those that know, this is Michelangelo's in the Sistine Chapel interpretation or painting of God leaning down from the heavens and with his finger touching man, giving man all the knowledge of God. Except, I want you to take note of this cloud, this cloak around God, and the position God is in. It was Michelangelo who painted the Sistine Chapel between the years 1508 and 1512. We can see God passing knowledge down from his finger. But Michelangelo also studied anatomy at the convent of Santa Maria del Santo Spirito in Florence. Here he would do his dissections on the corpses coming from the convent's hospital. Whether or not it is a coincidence, but below is a cross-section of our brain as seen by Michelangelo, which looks remarkably like the cloud surrounding God. Perhaps Michelangelo meant to convey nothing, but then perhaps he meant us to realize that God was within our brain. For without a doubt, our brain is the master of our life and our library of knowledge. Once more, dear friends, into the breach. Another story, another day of isolation. And I hope you like my fancy Australian shirt from the outback of somewhere. I know I'm going to entertain you by singing you a song. John Brown's body lies a-moulding in his grave. John Brown's body lies a-moulding in his grave. John Brown's body lies a-moulding in his grave, and his soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Yes, his soul goes marching on. His soul. What is your soul? Your soul is the amount of knowledge you hold in your head. And if you've got no knowledge up there, then you're a poor soul. If you've got a lot of knowledge up there, you're a good soul. So knowledge in your head is important, not only for you, but for your descendants, and you'll see why later on. Sir David Attenborough, in a programme called Genius of Britain, done by the BBC as documentary, wrote that Oxbridge University scientists had found the secret of life, DNA. I wrote back to Sir David and said, no. DNA is purely a copying machine. The secret to life is testosterone. If you've got no testosterone, there's no need to go and let your copying machine get to work. And that is having babies. So I should imagine that with no testosterone, you're going to sit there. If everybody had no testosterone, we'd all sit around wondering what to do next. But with testosterone, the urge comes on all animals to go forth and multiply, both male and female. So here we have this wonderful thing that's going to get us up and going. Another little break. There's another song, isn't there? Birds do it, bees do it, educated fleas and politicians do it. The mating game. And it can be a disappointing game. You can be out of it by one wrong move to your fellow partner, whoever she or he may be, and you're out of the game. And as I wrote here somewhere, We might think we're civilized, but we're just as primitive as any other animal in the world is concerned when it comes to the mating game. Have you ever bothered to think about this thing that lives within this skull, this protection? The heart's not protected, the liver's not protected, but this is, because he's the boss. Now you might think you are an individual person, it's just you. But think about it. Do you talk to yourself? Do you have a little chat? Do ladies go into the shoe shop and say, oh, what beautiful shoes they are? And then a voice says in their head, says, what about those shoes over there? There's somebody else there, and he is the master. He is, listen to him. If you're in trouble, don't panic. Let your brain take over. I remember I had an accident on the 14th of August 1914. I was with my grandson on the M40 at Stokenchurch, and they were doing road repairs, so we had to pull over. And a lorry hit me at the rear and sideswiped me. And I was off. 1 minute this way, next minute that way, next minute this way. I missed all the traffic, hit the barrier, came round and hit the other barrier. And yet I didn't hit anybody. And the car was drivable, just about. What I'm trying to say is, I wasn't driving that car. That car was going, the reactions were so fast that I might have had my hands on the wheel. But to make the decisions were far greater than my eyes or I could do. My brain had taken over. He'd taken over because he didn't want to die. And he didn't want to die. And he still doesn't want to die. And so how does he get over it? How do we live forever? We live forever because the brain wants to make himself. And as soon as he's made himself, which is about a bit young, I must admit, but about 14, the old testosterone comes to the fore, and young boys start flexing their muscles. And a strange thing takes over us. This is the interesting part. At about 14, 13, 14, 12, whatever it is, but about that age group, boys all over the world, some get it and some don't, and some of them get it a lot. Boys all over the world start getting acne. Girls don't get it so much, but they can get it, but boys get it a lot. They come out in acne, they want to squeeze them. They pay fortunes on stuff from the chemist to get rid of them because they're in the mating game. But I want to put you 3,000-4,000 years ago, because we haven't changed since then. We've still got 5 tiny fingers and 5 tiny toes, or 10. And so nature wants you, nature in every case wants the fittest to survive, the fittest to have babies. Female elephants will start bellowing for the males to come in from the jungle or the savannas for the mating game. And so the first elephant turns up, and yes, he mates. And the second, and each time an elephant comes up that mates, he's obviously bigger than the one that's there wanting to do it again. Until eventually the biggest elephant turns up, or he doesn't turn up at all. But the main thing is, the biggest elephant, the strongest elephant, is there, and 8 days after she starts bellowing, she drops her egg, and so he is there to fertilize it, the strongest. And boys, of course, with this acne, look pretty ugly to girls who are doing their best to display themselves, as we know on Saturday night in our local town, when girls go round in the middle of winter with bare midriffs and bosoms just about to break forth. They're out displaying, whether they know it or not, because women have only got, I think it's 600 eggs to drop, and their time clock finishes at about 42 years of age. whereas men can produce children when they're dead, providing they're still warm. So the young boy's got these pimples, and girls look at him, and although they will mate with most things at that age, because they're the same age, they are put off by this non-glamorous, non-healthy look. And so the older males have a chance for mating. But even then, nature still wants the very, very best. And so you find that boys start growing beards at 14. They're not much, there's a couple of hairs. 15, 16, it's getting bushy now. Have you thought of what it's for? It's not for shaving off. Girls don't get it, like nowhere near as much. It's not, oh my goodness, it's not for shaving off. And it comes whether you like it or not. And your hair's growing long. This is 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. Your hair's growing long, your beard's coming in. It's matching him to the hair on your chest. And it becomes a solid mass, almost like horn. And so therefore, when two big major males meet up to do the mating game, one of them's going to either, if the weak one will disappear, but if they're both the same status, they will fight. And nature doesn't mind them losing an arm. A man with one arm can live. A man with one leg can live. True, not for long in 4,000 years ago, because a lion would have had him before he could hop away. No, these two males are fighting, and nature wants them to fight to the bitter end. And so the last thing she wants is for them to get their teeth into their necks and rip their throat out, because that is the end of the game. So the brain is also protecting itself from this fight of reproduction, of passing on your genes. And so we don't. Nobody ever. I don't think anybody's thought about what the hair on men's bodies do. But that is as old as man had ever stood upright. The next thing is the brain never sleeps. Oh, the body, the servant. You've got the brain, the servant, the eyes to see, the ears to hear, the mouth to digest your food, to keep the body going, and the good old legs. The old legs. Without the legs, you're in a wheelchair, and within a wheelchair, life is pretty grim. The adventures are over. So, and I forgot what I was, as usual. I'll come back to that when I think about it. The brain doesn't sleep. I was reminded I was living alone in my cottage, and my grandson came to stay with me, Oliver. Dear Oliver. And he, now I can hear the foxes outside, the cars going by, and my brain says, there's no problem, just carry on sleeping. And there was this clink, a completely unfamiliar sound, clink, and immediately I was awake. I wasn't tired, drowsy, I was awake, ready for battle. And all my grandson had done an unusual sound. He just clicked the latch onto the toilet, the bathroom door. And that was a sound I would never have heard except if I was awake. And the other thing was to do with the brain. He wants to play jokes on you. Some of them can be quite horrible. Some of them can be, I think, disturbed by... Oh, I got my phone going. You're never alone with a phone. As I was saying, so the brain never sleeps. It also plays jokes on you, insofar that I was asleep. No, I wasn't. I was going to get up and make a cup of tea and get on my computer. And my father comes in and shakes me and says, there's a burglar in the house. So I get up and put my little side light on. I was awake. I thought I was awake at the time. And I put the side light on of my bed and I wake up. And of course, my father's been dead for 30 years. And it was a joke I put it down as a joke by my little brain. And I could hear him laughing, and you had to laugh back because I thought that was a very good joke to wake me up. And I was asleep all the time, even thinking about getting up to put the computer on and get a cup of tea. So the brain is a wonderful piece of kit. There's deja vu, for example. Have you been there before? I think it's possible. I think the brain can carry messages from one generation to the next generation. And this is a David Attenborough program again. He was on about the moth that flies from, or the butterfly that flies from Mexico to Canada. And how does he do it? Especially as he has to do it in 4 sequences. He has to fly north as far as he can in the summer months, lay his eggs, the eggs hatch, and he dies of course, the eggs hatch, and they eat the foliage and of that area, and then they turn into butterflies and fly on and do the same thing every time. There's got to be some communication going on between the butterfly and the new eggs being laid to make the caterpillar. They also put down some leaves for the caterpillar to eat, and it didn't like them. So the next generation of caterpillars of that line of descent, they put the same leaves down, and the caterpillar wouldn't eat them. Something had told the caterpillar from the previous generation that these aren't good to eat, so don't bother. So there seems to be a deja vu. Have we been there before? Another little break while the old grey matter thinks. So the brain, who doesn't want to die, makes itself. And if you think about it, if you took that baby child, take the man away, just the lady and their baby, and fed them properly, had all the luxuries they wanted, and put them into a room, that child would come out eating the same food, liking the same food as her mother, and having the same accent, and having the same interests. She is a clone. It's only when the husband and her are alive that they both clone the baby, but it is still them that's making that child. It'll be a slight variation on the mother or the father. It'll be a mix. If you take that baby at birth, which is your baby, your genes, and you give it to a stranger of a different faith, a different creed, different upbringing. For example, if you give it to a Muslim, then that baby is going to be brought up in that faith, bowing down to Mecca 5 times a day and speaking Arabic. In actual fact, that baby will be his child, but your genes. And that's what the family is all about. The family is the strong unit. Without the family, the child is at a disadvantage. And even that disadvantage can be an advantage. My father was an orphan. He was thrown into the canal at about 3 or 4 years of age, probably less. Otherwise he'd have thrown his mother in. His mother threw him in. I strongly feel his father in 1903, his father had run off with another woman, and it had driven my grandmother potty. So she threw her son into the canal. And so my father was brought up in Kidderminster Workhouse at the end of Sutton Road till he was about 12, and he was adopted by the family called Cox. So in actual fact, if you cut me, there's no Cox blood in me. It's all Chester blood. But because he was the lowest of the low, and you can't sink much lower than be an orphan, farmed out to a family that don't want you for love, they want you for work. And my father did work. In fact, he ran away from home and joined the Royal Army Flying Corps. And I'm pretty certain he was billeted with the Private Mills, who turns out to be Lawrence of Arabia. Oh, that's another story, and I'm digressing. But my father was the lowest of the low. And yet he prospered because he couldn't go any lower. And he prospered. And from him, I learned how to prosper, and I prospered. So it can be a good thing to be an orphan. You can have every impetus to go forward, upwards and onwards. Another break, if you don't mind. A little tea break, perhaps. I'll get you a cup of tea if you like. Now I come to repairing the old servant. As I say, the brain does not want to die, and losing your legs is certainly a good way of doing it, especially 4,000 years ago. So the brain doesn't want to die. If you look at all the animals in the jungle and the fearsome fights they have to put, not only to kill, to eat, and the injuries they must have if they don't get killed to eat, there isn't a vet in sight. And so how do they repair themselves? And some of them repair themselves quite remarkably when they find their bones have been healed up. And I think the brain, if you ask the brain to cure you, he will. Let's face it, people smile at this, but let's face it, you're ill. And what happens? Your glands swell up as the brain immediately sends messages for the white corpuscles to multiply, to go out and kill the disease that's in your body. Obviously, sometimes, like the coronavirus, it can't do it, or it hasn't yet learned to. Although a vaccine, we're told, will advise the brain of what it's got to do next time, of what weapons or what enemy is encountering. That's what vaccines are for. They tell the brain, we're giving you a little dose of it, and you now know what it's like, so when it comes, you're already armed to attack it. And so the brain will help you repair yourself. Now, I'm 85 and I'm getting flaky. As you said, the old brain is beginning to forget what it's got to say. But I've never been ill. I've had one operation, a prostrate, for the waterworks, but I don't think the brain could have cured that. But I've never been ill. If I have been ill, I have been ill, I've always said to the brain, cure it. And he's cured it. And every night when I go to bed, I pat my knees and say, thanks knees, and my knees say, thanks brain. Yes, you could think I'm being loopy. I'm talking to myself, which most people do most of the time, and they do it in their language of their choice. So my brain and my body seem to get on quite well. I think 85 ain't bad, but you can feel you're knocking on the pearly gates door. So if you ask your brain, if you get into the habit at an early age of saying to your brain, as treating your brain as a friend and saying, brain, cure me, he probably will, or generally does. He has for me. And it's rather the same as in the Middle Ages. People came and touched holy relics. And they were cured. They weren't all cured, but a lot of them were. Touching the king's hand was a sure sign of being cured, whether it did or not, but I'm sure it did for some. And now they've discovered, doctors have now discovered, that people are moaning about, I can't get well, doctor, I can't get well. They've come up with this cunning plan of saying they're experimenting on this, a new tablet. We want you to be to experiment on, would you mind testing this tablet out for us? And people do, and they really think they've got a new discovery, medical discovery. And they take the tablet, and they're cured. and the tablet is a placebo. And you can ask any doctor, placebos are beginning to cure people when they have no scientific value of doing anything of the sort. Croaky. And that's because I'm a smoker. Thank you to Her Majesty the Queen, or HM in government. Because in those days of old, you could get, the army gave you free cigarettes. If you remember the song, what's the use of worrying? It never was worthwhile. So, light up a lucifer and light your fag, and smile, boys, that's the style. Yeah, they didn't want you to worry when you were going to get shot next day or that afternoon. And I've been on it since 1954. I'd like to get off it. But that's another thing about the brain. The brain likes it. It likes heroin. And that's why it's hard to break off it, because the brain wants it. The brain likes my nicotine. It hasn't. I haven't suffered too much from it. I haven't had a cancer. And what else does the brain like? Oh yes, that's right. You see, lots of people do crossword puzzles. And they sit for hours doing it. And you wonder why. It's just a case of getting a clue and making an answer that fits to the crossword puzzle. It's not productive, doesn't make you food, it doesn't get you your next dinner, it's just preoccupies the brain. And then you realise that the person doesn't like it, it's the brain that likes it. And why does it like it? It likes puzzles. If you starve the brain of a puzzle, it'll die of boredom. I remember the TV advert where the girl's on a bike and she's pedaling away and says, this is for hips, this is for me bottom. And then she goes to a cupboard and gets an apple and says, this is for me heart. And then she gets some toothpaste and says, this is for me teeth. She's doing the wrong jobs. By all means, do exercise. But exercise your brain. Your brain needs exercising. And he is cunning. I go to bed at night and a voice in my head says, let's play a couple of games on solitaire. So we do on the computer. And I said, come, I gotta go to bed. I'm talking to myself, but this is quite normal with me. And I want to go to bed, and the brain says, no, please, let's have 2 more games. And guess what we do? And sometimes I'm in bed trying to get to sleep, and the brain is playing the game in my head. And that's what the brain needs. It needs stimulation. No stimulation, and he'll wither on the vine. Another break, if I may. How can our brain help us with poverty and wealth? I was thinking we could forget about wealth because the wealth are wealthy and the rich are rich, and we think about the poor. But we shouldn't forget the wealthy. They generally started from being poor. There's the old adage of clog to clogs in 4 generations. A clog, of course, is a poor man's shoe made of wood, which in my youth you could still buy in the north of England. It was a very, very simple piece of wood which you slipped onto your foot, and with some metal round the edges you clunked your way to work. And so a poor man, and it's generally a poor man, thinks of a bright idea and it works, and he makes a fortune. And by the time he's dead, he's got a big business going and his son takes over. And his son has been indoctrinated by the brain of his father, and he continues. But his son hasn't had to do anything. He's just had a good education, a good life. And he lives on. The father, the son are dead. The grandson is now alive. And he's having the parties and the hunting and the shooting and the fishing. And he will neglect the business. And by the time his son comes, it's frazzled away. And the fourth generation finds himself bankrupt and back to wearing clogs. So the rich should always remember they've really got to push their descendants to remember where it came from. And some of the things are so simple that make a fortune. Like the gentleman who took his dog for a walk and found it was covered in burrs, seeds with little hooks on, and stuck into the fur. And he developed velcros and made a fortune. James Watt, so the legend goes, saw his mother's kettle on the fire with the lid popping up and down with the steam pushing it up, and he realized he could convert coal into heat into energy that boiled the steam, and the steam would drive a railway train. And so the Industrial Revolution in England began. But I'm sure there'd be many a mother who would say to the son, don't be so daft, James, I'm sure somebody has thought of it before. And they haven't. So keep thinking. As for the poor, I'm reminded of the poem by Omar Khayyam, I think it's 12th century. There are those who know not, and know not they know not. They are fools, shun them. There are those who know, but know not they know. They are asleep, awaken them. There are those who know, but know not they know. I hope I haven't repeated that. And there are those who know and know they are wise, follow them. And so knowledge, as you can see, it's knowledge all the time. The more knowledge you've got, the more successful and prosperous you'll be. And so the poor need a stimulus. The poor don't want to learn because they don't want their children to learn because it makes them look silly. What they've got to do, what the education authorities have got to do, in my opinion, is to teach the poor grandparents and the poor parents to pass on whatever information they've got, the things they did in the war, the allotment, whatever it may be, pass this on to their children and impress upon their children that don't have a day after school to work for your dad. Go to school and learn. And they will then be prosperous. But ignorance, which is a lack of what you've got up here, is definitely a way to poverty. If every school, I'm told some schools do, gave their 14-year-old pupils a £5 note and told them to go out and buy something and come back next week and sell it and come back next week with £10, then you've started the little grey cells to work, that how easy it is to be prosperous. There's a mathematical joke where the squire is going through the village with his horse and he says to the blacksmith, how much will it cost to shoe my horse? And the blacksmith says, oh my lord, it won't be very much. He says, I'll charge you a penny for the first nail, and I'll charge you twopence for the second, and fourpence for the next, and eightpence for the next, and you've got 32 nails, you've got 4 hoofs, and 8 nails in each hoof, that's 32 nails. And the squire thinks, oh, that's very cheap, and he gives it to the blacksmith to do, and the blacksmith gives him a bill for about £1 million. It's a little mathematical thing you can do yourself. So if you can turn £5 into £10, and £10 into £20, and £20 into £40, you're on the way, and you've become an entrepreneur. And there's nothing wrong with entrepreneurs, because I'm one. So that's getting poverty. What about how do you feel yourself? If you're looking, it's a strange thing. You get to 20, and from then on, although you age, your body, your servant ages, the body still thinks itself young. And on that happy note, I need to read you a poem and I have to go and get it. On the left is Ramesses, the mummy of Ramesses II, and considering he's at least 3,000, no, more than that, nearly 4,000 years old, he's not looking too bad. And on the right, of course, is an effigy of one of his statues, and of course, that's what he might have looked like. But of course, they can get the DNA from these mummies. And I was, because I like to think, I was thinking we can clone Dolly the sheep. We cloned it from DNA from the mother into a sterile egg, and we got an exact replica of Mummy the sheep. Not Mummy of Ramesses II, but of the sheep that laid the egg, and they did the cloning of it. Of course, if they can do that with sheep, they can do that with Ramesses II or Napoleon. They can take DNA from the body and make him live again. Of course, they won't, because that is a resurrection the church definitely doesn't want to happen. And as for living forever, a little break. I am reminded in Greek, in the classical Greek stories of Achilles, who was the hero at Troy, if you remember, and his mother Thetis had dipped him in the river Styx, the sacred river between the living and the dead. And she dipped him right in, but she held his ankle, so his ankle did not submerge in the fabled river Styx. And so at Troy, he was killed when Paris shot an arrow into his ankle, and it killed him. Now, I'm reminded of that. And so when I was in Egypt, because I've always said the River Nile is the river Styx. You take the dead from the one side over onto the west bank, and all the dead were buried there. The living lived on the east bank. So I dived into the Nile, completely submerged myself, ankle and all, and in the hope that I will be immortal. If you do this in sunny Egypt, then don't go in with a saw or a cut, because there are parasites in there that will see you dead quicker than you can think. Yes, there is this urge to live forever. I'm reminded of a visit to Worcester Cathedral, and there was a tomb there on the cathedral wall to a gentleman that had died in the Civil War of 1646, I think it was, and it had a garland of flowers around it. So I asked the verger what that was about, and he said, oh, every year the family come and put some flowers around it. So there they are, they're trying to live forever. The nobility have already twigged out how to live forever. You've ever been to the stately home and gone up the great staircase, and there on the walls are the pictures of previous ancestors back to 1066 perhaps. And so little Johnny, who goes up that stair, he can't help but stare at these pictures of his famous descendants, ancestors. He must be being downloaded as every night he goes to bed. This is what he is expected to do, and to remember his ancestors. Now, I was thinking about living forever. I would like to think that my descendants would think of me in the future. And so I had made a beautiful rocking horse in cherry wood with a flowing manes and flaring nostrils and glaring eyes and a nice saddlecloth. And I put onto it, my name is Faithful. And though I may sleep, I will be faithful from generation unto generation. And I had my daughter put the first plaque on, which was for Oliver in 1995, I think. And all the other ones put their plaques on. The idea was in the distant future, somebody would say, "Mummy, Mummy, who's Oliver?" And she would say, "That's your great, great, great grandfather." And that's living forever. A little break, will I think. Yes, the thought is back. Why do fathers want to pass on their names, give their names to their sons? Oh, a lot of people don't do it, but a lot of people do. My great-grandfather was called Henry James. His son was called James Henry, and my father was called Henry James. Or I think there's one missing, but there was always Henry James. They wanted to live forever, even though they were poor old soldiers, poor old men, poor people. There was an old lady. She was mugged on the 25th of November one year, and I can't think which year it was, probably about 4 years ago. And she was mugged by two young men, 14 and 17. And they stole her handbag. And she was very upset because in that handbag, she kept the ashes of her husband. Well, that showed a very good union. And it wasn't though the husband had died a couple of days ago. He died a long time ago. So when these muggers opened her handbag and found this casket within, their hopes did indeed turn to ashes. Now the next one is medical. What can the brain do for us? You break a leg. Who mends it? It's not the doctor. He sets it. It's the brain that sends a message to wrap calcium around it and repair it. So is that you or is that your brain? You don't even know it's being done. Another little pause while I think.